This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and coming up next is a great conversation with Peter Adams, who does Faces of Open Source. He did both my face and my co-host face. That's Simon Phipps, and like 98 others, something like that. He's got NFTs of these things. He's a veteran of the advertising industry. He's a veteran of all kinds of creative stuff, and he's an awesome dude. It's a great conversation, and that's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 652, recorded Wednesday, October 20th, 2021. Faces of Open Source. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Hover. Whether you're a developer, photographer, or a small business, Hover has something for you to expand your projects and get the visibility you want. Go to hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. Good morning, good evening, good whenever it is, wherever you are. I am Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly, and I am joined this week by Simon Phipps himself over there in the UK, in Southampton, waving for the watchers.
Good evening.
For the listeners.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Doc. I am here in Southampton, as you say. I actually very bravely left the compound yesterday and went up to London to go and see an art exhibition. So that's the end of my 2 years of solitary confinement.
And you have your training keyboard back behind you there. Your original
absolutely, yes. Yeah. So I was saying while we were setting up, the keyboard that's over here to my left and maybe to your right if I've got the camera reversed. This is an old Imperial 66. This was my mother's typewriter. This was used to type many things that are important to me, but much more importantly, it's where I trained my 2 index fingers how to type.
I learned to touch type, and it took me, a year. Of course, in the 7th grade, which is, I don't know what that is in UK, but when you're like 12 years old, roughly, the idea was that you took a whole year of typing, and I learned on an upright Underwood, and it's why I destroy keyboards even today. I wear out keyboards because I'm still typing hard. Because
this thing I have to press ever so hard to get to make the keys strike. Oh yeah,
no, this is a big mechanical action going on there. So both of us not only know our guest today, Peter Adams, we have been shot by him individually.
We have. Survived. And survived.
I have to say I'm really glad to have him on the show. I love his work, which is more than just photography. And did he come over to the UK to shoot you?
No. He, I went and visited him in his studio in Portland during OSCON one year. It took us years to actually arrange to meet up, and we finally met up. I don't know, about 3 years ago, I think it must be. Yeah. And by then, I had already introduced him to a load of other people that he photographed before me. So.
Well, Peter is an interesting character. He does so much more than just the photography, although I hate to say just because his photography is that good. And we'll jump into it, but first I have to let you all know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Hover. It's time to make plans and let Hover help you achieve them. If you're a blogger, creating a portfolio, building an online store, or just want to make a more memorable redirect to your LinkedIn page, Hover has the best domain names and email addresses just for you. Email at your domain name is key to connecting with customers and building trust for your brand. They have domain-based emails for all your needs, small or large. It's so easy to set up. You can add as many mailboxes to your domain as you need. When your domain renews, your mailboxes do too. The prices are unbeatable. Their most popular mailbox is a no-brainer solution for business owners. Get access from anywhere. Use the email app you're already comfortable with. If apps aren't your thing, their webmail can be accessed from wherever you are too. Hover isn't here to upsell you on stuff you don't need. They just want to help. They have pro-level tools. They have powerful domain and email management tools that are intuitive and easy to use, whether you're a web pro or just getting started. They're private and secure with WHOIS privacy protection included with your domain purchase. Your private information will remain just that, private. It's a great way to reduce spam and protect yourself from unwanted solicitations. Hover Connect lets you pick the service you want to use to build and host your website. Connect helps you start using your domain name with just a couple of clicks. At Hover, you're a customer and not a source of data. Take back control of your data with reliable, tracker-free email. Hover is trusted by hundreds of thousands of customers who use their domain names and email to turn their ideas into reality. And I can testify on this one because I've used Hover since the beginning. In fact, I've moved my domains from many other sources into Hover, and they could not possibly have better customer support. So whether you're a developer, photographer, or a small business, Hover has something for you to expand your projects and get the visibility you want. Go to hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. That's hover.com/twit for 10% off your domain extension for a full year. And we thank Hover for their support. Okay, so our guest today is Peter Adams. And Peter, I have to say, he's got this great bio, so I'm just going to read it off here. An award-winning photographer, and if you look at it, you know why, whose work has appeared in IEEE Spectrum, Bloomberg Businessweek, National Geographic, the New York Times, and other places. His focus on the tech industry has led him to photograph everything from the largest AI chip, which I've looked at, and it is a mother. I want them as a guest, to the next generation of artificial hearts. His portrait of tech pioneers have made him one of the top portrait photographers in Silicon Valley. He's a lover of tech history. He started the Faces of Open Source. That's where I'm in. I'm one of those faces in 2014, and Simon's in there too. And has since photographed over 100 of these people, as well as unsung members of the community. And it's actually his second career. He developed the first magazine on the web rack back in 1993 when the web was barely here. I think everybody was using links at that time, but we didn't even have Mosaic. How the dot-com bubble bursting brought Peter to open source, and he can tell us a lot about the Faces of Open Source project, the Unix Folklore project with Bell Labs, the Apache 20th Anniversary project, and he's got a late assignment for IEEE Spectrum. That's all in his blog. And without tarrying anymore, I welcome Peter to the show. Hey, dude.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be with you guys.
It is. It's great to be with you too, man. So I mean, because the Faces of Open Source is probably the thing closest to our hearts, minds, and faces here. Let's start there. What got you into that?
Well, I had worked in the tech industry for, had a 20-year career before coming back to photography professionally. And I just knew the open source story. We can talk a little bit about that, how I got into open source early, but I knew it, and I knew that it was such an important part and increasingly becoming more of an important part of every facet of the tech industry. And I, as a magazine photographer, I get hired and brought on to photograph CEOs and influencers and newsmakers. And I was always struck at how few open source pioneers were actually the ones being featured behind a lot of the tech innovation that was out there. It was always, the executives at the company. But there was this whole story beneath the technology that they were promoting, which was open source and the use of open source. And I just felt like it was time to feature. It was time to promote the notable people behind open source, but also the unsung people, because just having participated in that community for a long time, there are a lot of unsung heroes in the community that may not have a Wikipedia page, may not be on the conference circuit, that may not be top of mind for people, but really had substantial contributions that without, we all would not be checking email and using GPS and sending, file attachments around the internet. So I just felt like it was my way as a photographer to give back to that community, tell that story, and really try to get it to be more of a, at the foremost, at the front of mind for regular people, because most people I talk to, most non-tech people, they really don't understand this story, and they don't understand how critical it actually is in their lives day to day. So that was really the impetus behind it.
Something that strikes me looking at it, looking at the collection, is that, and actually an interesting thing about being part of the open source community is that while I'm a relatively old guy, I'm not the oldest by a long shot. There are others that are even older than I am. And I mean, and we're all mortals, so I think that's another, it seems a little morbid, but not really. I think it's another positive aspect of what you're doing there, that you've got these people while they're still around, So I don't know, have you lost any of them yet? I don't think you have. But.
Yeah, a few of them. One of for that particular reason, Doc, it's a really good point. I started with the Unix community at Bell Labs, just because this is a group of people that started in the late '60s, and some of them are departing. So I focused in there, and actually the project for the first year was I mostly focused on Unix at Bell Labs and the BSD project. And that was really just pulling a thread and seeing where it goes and getting introduced to the next person, But I am very conscious that I have a limited window to photograph people. And if I want to tell this story, it's important to get people into the project sooner rather than later. And as you both actually know, how hard it is to the scheduling of people to come into the studio and spend, anywhere from an hour to 3 hours with me to create these images. That's hard. That's the hardest part of the project, is the logistics and the scheduling. Some of the folks in the project I scheduled with for literally almost 5 years, just because it's not a funded project. It's a self-funded project. So everybody has to be, the schedules have to magically meet, and mix up. We have to be in the same city. Sometimes I'll photograph in New York, I'll photograph in LA, I'll photograph in the Bay Area, Portland, which is where I photograph Simon. But there has to be a conference. There has to be a reason for me to be there, or enough density that I can bring enough people into the studio and set up a studio in a city around a conference, hopefully where people are going to be already. And just that scheduling is the hardest part.
Right. So have you? Do you have any tricks for getting the people who aren't on the US West Coast? Because there's a whole load of people who are over there who really ought to be in your list.
Yeah, my tricks have typically been scouring conference attendee lists and speaker lists and seeing who is coming to the US right now. Right now, I don't have backing or sponsorship from somebody that's going to fly me to the UK per se, or to India, or somewhere in Africa. There's lots of actually places outside of the US, Japan, China, that I want to actually go and extend the project to. That just requires funding, the right group stepping up to say, hey, it would be great to see faces extended in this geography. And, I'm working on some of that. I'm having some conversations with people. It just hasn't materialized yet. So right now I'm scouring conference speaker lists and seeing who's coming to the US, and then trying to build either other work or multiple people around, one or two key people that I'm trying to get photographed.
Right. Because it struck me that I don't think you've got Andrew Tridgell yet, who was the author of Samba, who's probably the person who's had the biggest impact outside Linux itself.
Definitely.
And he's in Australia, so you're going to have trouble if you can't get over there, or and he doesn't travel as much as he used to. So
he told me to look him. He told me to look him up when I'm in. Is he in Brisbane or I forget, or Adelaide?
I think he's in Sydney.
Okay, he's in Sydney. Okay.
Yeah. So you started doing this a while back. Was this the first kind of thematic portfolio that you started on, or was there something before this?
For this project, this was, for the tech industry, this was my big thematic project. I mean, I've got about almost 130 people in it now. It'll probably, it could wind up being several hundred people. I don't really see an end in sight because the community keeps changing and morphing and new people keep coming into it.
So I recall that you got into this kind of about the same time that I started really focusing on open source, around about the time that the .com bubble burst and the server pyramid scheme was finally undermined. Do you want to tell us the story about how you got into open source in the first place?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's a funny story. Probably it involves you tangentially also, so I have a slight bone to pick with you. I was in the late 90s. I had just left the advertising industry. I'd worked at some of the very early internet ad agencies and doing ad tech essentially. And I had left to found my own company, a company called Primary Knowledge, which was one of the first SaaS-based web analytics services out there. So this is all pre-Google Analytics and the stuff that most people take for granted right now. And when we were running that business, we had to, there was no cloud, right? There was, I could run that business now on, $700 a month of an Amazon, cloud account. But back then it required buying huge hardware and putting it into co-location centers. So part of our business plan to get that to work back in 99, before there was a lot of good distributed database technology, was to buy Sun Oracle, really big Sun Oracle. So we bought the giant Sun E10K, essentially a mainframe type computer from Sun, which is where I may have a bone to pick with you. And part of the promise was that having multiple CPUs in that one system, we would be able to take advantage of this feature that Oracle had called Oracle Parallel Query. And that was key for data mining and data exploration. Again, this is back in 99, and we were really all in on the sort of commercial hardware, commercial software side. Well, needless to say, that didn't work. Right. So we install all this stuff. We spend literally millions of dollars buying this hardware, buying this software, and Oracle just, basically cops to the fact that there's a bug and parallel query won't run across CPUs, which was the entire reason that we were able to do this. And, we had tested stuff before, but not a bunch of edge cases that used all of the CPUs. There was a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, it didn't work. We wound up, the bubble bursts, the VC money runs out. We wind up selling the company. And literally on the last day, I'm literally shutting the lights out in my office in Lower Manhattan. And a FedEx guy shows up at the door and starts knocking on the door. And I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, is this somebody whose bill we forgot to pay, or what is this? Who's delivering me a FedEx? It's a FedEx from Oracle with 20 CDs with the fix for the bug. The day I shut the doors of the company, and I said to myself at that point, I will never ever use commercial software that I don't have control over on something so critical in my business ever again. And we had started to use open source to try to get around this. We had set up Linux clusters. We were doing, different stuff we had already moved in that direction when we hit the bug, but that was just like the nail in the coffin. It was so dramatic that I was there shutting the lights out and they're sending me the bug too little, too late. The bug fix too little, too late. So that was the beginning. That was it. From there on, every venture afterwards, all open source.
Yeah, so I was still at IBM in 1999, so I can plead not guilty to that one.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah,
good.
I was hired into Sun to try and get Java open source, and it took me 5 years to get that done. So,
right.
So my apologies on behalf of anyone who I inherited Sun from, but honestly, that the lesson you learned about Oracle is a lesson well learned, and that everyone should be learning. I think, regardless of whether it's open source.
Right. So that got me into open source the hard way, if you will.
Yes. So where did you start with this? So it was colleagues at Bell Labs that you started with, did you say, or was there somewhere else? Who was your muse?
Yeah, I started with the folks at Bell Labs, and actually right around the same time, the X-Window, the X11 community. Jim Geddes was an early participant. There were lots of folks sort of coming out of that. Bell Labs, Steve Bourne, who was in Silicon Valley a lot. And then folks like in the BSD community, we had Eric Allman, of SendMail and BSD, there were a bunch of folks basically in the Bay Area that were sort of the early people that I photographed, and they liked the idea enough that they were willing to introduce me to other people. And then that branched out into basically sittings in New York and LA. So I would go east, and I would get a lot of people on the East Coast. And again, I was trying to focus early on Unix folks, David Korn, Michael Lesk of Lex fame, and then I would just branch out. I really just branch out from there. After I had gotten enough introductions, Kirk McCusick of the BSD community was also very, very helpful early on, just helping me think about the project as well. But after that, I approached the Linux Foundation and decided to show up at the Linux Kernel Developers Summit one year. And from there, I photographed Linus. I photographed lots of kernel developers essentially that one year, setting up in a little conference room in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that's kind of how it branched from there. And then it was really more after I had sort of some of those major bases and communities started, then it just kind of branched out, and then it became, well, who is that I want to photograph is actually in a geography at the same time I'm going to be in a geography.
Right. So as a recorder of history, do you feel a sense of responsibility about how you're framing that history by who you choose?
I do. The project could have gone a number of different ways. It could have been just very focused on the newsmakers, right? But I felt really strongly that just having the people that that have been in articles, that have been on the front end of the news, it's really not representative of the community. And I wanted this to be a big tent project. I wanted it to include lots of different communities within open source and lots of different kinds of people that have lots of different kinds of stories. So to me, it was really important for it to be as inclusive as possible and as representative as possible. And not necessarily representative of matching statistics of contributors to a certain community, but representative of the people that I know are putting in the work. And, if you're on Twitter, or you go to conferences and you meet people and you meet the community of people. And it's not just developers. That was another huge important thing for me to really focus on, is I didn't want it to just be folks that wrote code, because without the rest of the community, the community managers, the people that manage the open source program offices at companies, the journalists, you don't get the legal folks, the folks that write the licenses, that litigate the licenses, that do the enforcement of GPL, the foundations. Without those people included in the project, you're really just looking at a small slice of the contributor base of the people that make open source work. So to me, it was really important for it to be a big tent project, so that it reflected really the historical contributions.
So I have a couple of further questions about the project, but first I have to let people know that we have at Twit, Club Twit. Club Twit is a very cool thing. It's for $7 a month, you get all the shows ad free. It's members only. There's a lot of members only Twit Plus bonus feed or outtakes behind the scenes, special content from our hosts. You can chat with hosts and producers. We have our own Discord you can participate in. It's very active and it's a lot of fun. There's just all kinds of things you can do around the Twit community through the members only Club Twit. And all you have to do is go to the URL I'm not seeing right now, and somebody's going to put in the chat. There it is. Yeah, twit.tv/Club Twit. And there is also, I need to let you know about the Untitled Linux show that happens on Saturdays. And that's part of it as well. And you can go back and listen to old shows. But the Untitled Linux show is a really fun thing that Jonathan Bennett's involved with. And he'll correct me on the back channel shortly. Anyway, Club Twit. Go dig it. Okay, so Peter, I'm wondering how you thought about the personalities of these people, because I think you've done this amazing job of catching something about each of them that isn't necessarily, even with the ones I know. I mean, I was looking at Vint Cerf, for example, who I've known for a long time. One of those people is even older than I am, but younger in many ways. You know, he in his three-piece suit. I once asked him, did you wear a three-piece suit in high school? And his answer was, and I carried a briefcase, right? You know. And then later,
that is so great.
I was at this event where a crew of people were talking to Snowden in Russia, and Vint greets him in Russian, and then starts talking to him in Russian, and then somebody else asked Vint, how many languages do you know? And Vint says, I don't know. Let me think. About 15. It's like, and that's like, you know, you've got the picture of him standing up, but this other one, it's like, you don't want to mess with this dude. You know, it's like, you know,
Yep.
He's like the architect in the second Matrix movie, right? You know,
literally, I think they literally called it after him. Yeah.
I think they did too. They're there. Yeah. For those watching a video, there's the guy.
I mean,
so I'm just wondering how you did it, you know, because it's so many of them, you know, to me, it's the best picture ever taken of all of them, Linus especially, which is just fantastic. But go ahead.
No, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, the short answer is I want everybody to look iconic. You know, there's enough nostrils up shots of people at podiums on the internet. And as Linus said to me during our shoot, when we were talking about this very issue, he said, you know, because I asked if he had any concerns about how he was photographed or things like that. And he said, have you seen the photos of me on the internet? I mean, it's just, you know,
don't do that.
It's a dumpster fire of just weird, you know, nostrils up conference shots. And I just really wanted everybody to be iconic, you know, and to stand the test of time and not, you know, and that's why I did it in black and white. That's why it's white background. I mean, there's some more technical issues around that in terms of maintaining consistency of the project over a long period of time. But I really wanted to focus in on the people, on the faces, on who people were. And I want people to be able to look at the photos and meditate on them and think, wow, there's a lot going on here. So Vint, you know that there's a lot going on behind those eyes. I mean, this is a person that has an incredible life experience. And, you know, I want that to come through. I want people to look at that photo and really be able to kind of dive into that. And, a photo with everybody kind of smiling or, more lifestyle-y, a little bit lighter. I don't think it has the gravitas of that this story deserves. I think this is an incredibly important story. You know,
it's funny that when Andrew Morton from Australia. I have a feeling you didn't get him in Australia, but
No.
he is Australian. And it's funny, when I first met him, I saw him at a conference, like, oh, he's this kind of dweeby guy with glasses. But then when I got to know him, and it was actually on a cruise, she'd had you on one of those cruises that we had back when the News Journal had money and existed.
Nice.
He, I found out he played Australian rules football, and he was one tough mother. Really seriously tough dude. And you kind of get his wisdom and experience, and being the alpha programmer that he is, but also the tough dude that he is too in that photo. It does work. It occurs to me that our technical director on the show, who was not, you're not going to see on camera, but is Ant Pruitt, who has his own show on photography here on the Twit network. And I'm going to ask for him because oh, good. Have you been on it? I don't know. You should be.
No, I haven't been on it, but I've listened to it. So awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And so I'm wondering, because I know a little bit. Yeah, he had to put up for those watching. There it is, hands-on photography. Highly recommended. So what gear do you use there? Because and what's your, what's the sort of chain of custody that you go through from shooting to production? Because it's clearly processed in some way, but it's very consistent across all of those.
Yeah, everybody in the project is photographed with a very high resolution medium format camera, digital medium format camera. It's from a company called Phase One, similar to Hasselblad, if you remember, Hasselblad. They're the main competitor to Hasselblad, essentially. So everybody gets photographed, with the very high resolution camera. We take a lot of photos. A lot of the style and what you see reflected in the images, other than the fact that it's black and white, because the files come out of the camera in color. A lot of that drama, though, is the lighting, and the lighting is fairly complex. It's a 6 light setup, essentially. With, you remember, when I set it up, to photograph both of you, it's a studio full of lighting equipment, essentially. So
you did mine in a driveway, which is,
and sometimes I'll pack my car and then set it all up in a driveway, right? Or in the back of I've shot people in the back of an alley. It's wherever I have to go with it. We'll bring it along, we'll set it up, whether it's in the field or in a studio. But if I can have a studio, then it gives us a little bit more room. Everybody's a little bit more comfortable. We don't have to worry about the wind knocking 6 lights over. But that's where the drama really comes from, is in the lighting, and then the micro expressions that you guys have, and that you all give me when I'm photographing you. And it may not seem like a lot, and of course I take a lot of photos, but sometimes, and I tell people when they're in a session, if I'm not taking a photo, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's generally because I'm waiting. I'm looking for something to come through. And sometimes it's just little micro expressions that really make the entire photo, and you don't even realize it's happening at that time. You kind of get a glimmer of it, and then I bring it into the computer afterwards and process them. Everything will become black and white with the same type of editing and processing. But the drama is really there in camera with the lighting and the connection that we have during the session.
Actually, so I had a couple of questions in one, but they have to do with, even though you're, I think, still a pretty young guy, you've been around a while, and we both were in the advertising business, and we both punched out and have some thoughts about it. And so I'd like to kind of get your thoughts on what's happened to that, and also what's happened to open source during the time that you've been shooting these people. Because, and I sort of see a connection, because one of the criticisms of what's happened in open source lately has been that it's become more corporatized. And that's been a kind of an occasional theme here. And the corporatization kind of ties in with ad tech as well, because ad tech pays for more and more stuff, even as it gets vilified more and more for being evil, especially on the surveillance side of it. So I wonder if you could connect those dots, or you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an ex ad tech person, so I spent 15 years doing ad tech ventures, really early stuff, back to the days of founding DoubleClick, which was a spin out of our ad agency back in the mid 90s. And I've seen the whole thing. I mean, it was actually very interesting when I got Lou Montulli, who was the engineer at Netscape that developed the browser cookie. When I got him in front of the camera for the Faces of Open Source project, we actually had a long conversation about it. And I think that the ad tech space is this just accidental miracle of innovation. Lou creates this cookie to help people log back into websites so that so that Netscape can do e-commerce, right? So when you come back, the website remembers you and it can pull up your shopping cart, and you can do authentication in a more flexible way. It was never designed for ad tech, so he develops this little bit, and an entire giant industry springs up, and then cannibalizes itself. Puts every media segment through a disruption machine, essentially, coming out the other end in sometimes not so good ways. And it's just this force that has made the internet what it is. You can't separate where the internet is today without the advent of digital and online advertising. So it's critically important. And of course, there were lots of players when I started in it. There were tons of ad networks, 20, 30, 50, 100 ad networks. At one point somebody circulated, Doc, you probably remember, there was a slide of it was some analyst at a VC or an investment bank had a slide that had all the logos of all the companies in the ad tech ecosystem. And it was like 1,000 logos on one PowerPoint slide. It was ridiculous. And of course, that has consolidated down quite a bit, right? Obviously, Google and Facebook, represent the lion's share of the ad dollars. And, at the same time, as you said, the parallels are there with open source. A lot of great stuff comes out of Google and Facebook, but I don't think that the same level of consolidation that we've seen in the ad spend space, in the online advertising space, I don't think that's happened to open source. I think there's many more flowers blooming and developing into different things, and of course you get some exceptions, like you get React coming out of Facebook. And you get a whole bunch of important database technologies coming out of Google, but they're by no means, there are others. There are Apache projects, galore, that have similar functionality to a lot of those other projects from the big corporates. And I think the Apache Foundation, I think, is doing huge work here, and really holding a huge anchor, holding the community down. They're anchoring the community, I think, with a lot of those projects. So I think it's similar that you have a lot of corporate influence, but I don't think that the same level. I haven't seen that same level of consolidation. What I have seen, and what people have brought up, quite a bit as this project has progressed, if I look for themes, is the move to this open core model. And that has become very controversial, as you guys know, and you guys know much better than I do. But that's something that really wasn't talked about when I started the project, back in 2014, nearly as much as it is today. And some of the people I photographed have kind of, that were in this project because their efforts and their projects were open source. They have embraced open core models, to some extent. And that has become a controversy. And I think, that controversy is part of the community, and I think it needs to be documented and deserves to be there and everything. But that's a new thing. That's a new thing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about those folk, because, a lot's changed from the early days. One of the conference talks that I do is a talk about the history of Sugar CRM, which when I was first seeing open source and when you were getting going in 2004 kind of time, was the darling of the open source community. And by 2018, Sugar doesn't even have an open source release. They de-released all of their open source. So, a lot changes over that time. I'm not sure the people change that much. I think that the corporations gradually shift and get people who have got safer hands for handling the more sociopathic behaviors. Are there any images that you took way back then that you think are now a historical artifact, no longer terribly relevant to open source?
No, I don't think so, because I think, everybody I photographed had either an unsung or major contribution to open source, at the time. And there are some people in the project that are no longer at the jobs that they were in or at the foundations that they were in when I photographed them. But I don't think that in any way lessens their contribution to the community. I think their contribution was big enough, important enough, or interesting enough, quite honestly, or unsung enough that I found it, interesting and important, as an editor, essentially, to include them into the project. And so, even though they're not doing they may not necessarily be doing that same work, they were, and they moved the community forward in really important way at that time, which I photographed them. I thought was important. And some people, were that I photographed are retired. They did their work, earlier in their career, but that work was a building block for other things. Like the folks at Bell Labs, are great examples of that. Everybody in the operating system community and the Linux community and BSD community, everybody, benefited from that work, and in some ways, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? That's how the community is able to evolve. So I think the historical contributions are just as important as the current contributions. Right.
Now, you talked about being an editor there. Something I didn't know about you that I saw in the show notes was that you had worked on a web magazine back in 1993. Now, I was helping IBM get into a web presence in 1993, and honestly, I wasn't sure that we shouldn't be doing it on Gopher rather than on the web. What on earth made you do a magazine on the web in 1993, and what did that actually mean?
Okay, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I was in college in 1993, still in college, and since 91, I was distributing an online publication at college via the local network, using hypertext, but using Apple's HyperCard products. So these HyperCard stacks, we created a magazine. I mean, I'm a photo geek, and so to me, it was all about when I got a hold of a computer, and then I found out that I could attach it to a network. Immediately, I got really excited because I'm like, well, this is going to be a great way to share my photography. This is fantastic. Okay, who's willing to do this? Oh, wait, there's no online publications yet. Oh, this HyperCard thing, I can put images in that. Let's try that. And then when the web came along in 93, and you had Rob McCool, do the first, HTTPD, and then there was a Mac port to that. You could easily set up a web server on a Mac. I started to get really interested in the web, and then Mosaic brought images to the web, and it was the rest is history for me. So from there, we transitioned this magazine that we had been distributing via HyperCard stacks and FTP archives and just crazy stuff that you had to do back in the day to get it in front of people, and we transitioned that to the web, and we created a web magazine, and it was articles sourced from students at my school, Trinity College in Hartford, but also from other schools, friends I had at other schools, And then we put out some note. We used Usenet. We put some notices up on Usenet. I forget which groups, saying we're doing this publication on the web. Would you like to contribute an article or a piece of poetry or a really great photo? Send it to us. And we had contributors from other universities and research institutions that had good internet access, essentially, and knew how to get on the web. So they would send that stuff to us. And we published this thing for 2.5 years and called it the Trincall Journal, because Trincall was the domain name of Trinity College. And it was, it was one of the few websites back in '93. I mean, back when you could go to the Netscape homepage, click on what's new, and literally browse every new site on the internet, in 5 minutes. We were getting tons of traffic. We were getting, a lot of interest. And as I graduated, that's how I got into the advertising business, because one of my good friends and mentor, a guy by the name of Dave Karlik, was basically starting, had started a huge web development business out of his agency in Silicon Valley at an agency called Poppy Tyson, which Doc probably remembers well. And they were doing the websites for Netscape, for the White House, for Intel, Silicon Graphics, all the sort of very early adopters. And that's how I kind of got sucked into it. I was going to go off and be a photographer and a photojournalist. And Dave convinced me to come to the advertising business and see this internet thing take off. And, it was best decision of my life. But that was sort of my on-road from there. Was after developing this magazine online, a lot of people were interested. A funny story related to that. The other person that noticed that magazine was Time Inc. And they wanted to meet with me, and I had no idea. I'm a college kid, and I wasn't. I had interned at Bloomberg Business News, and I had been in a newsroom, and I thought I would probably be a photojournalist. So I had some idea of who the people were, but not really. And I get to Time Inc. for this job interview. They call me up and they say, well, we see your magazine. This is really good stuff. We're doing this thing called Pathfinder, which is going to be this big Time Inc. media thing, and it's going to be on Time Warner Cable, and they had all sorts of ideas. And I get into the room. I have no idea who I'm really going to be meeting with. And it turns out, and I didn't have any appreciation for this at the time, I'm sitting and interviewing with Walter Isaacson. Because at the time, Walter Isaacson is running this digital thing. They probably dumped it on him to say, we don't know what to do with this, Walter. Can you sort it out? This looks like it's going to be big. And he grabbed it, and he's running this division. I'm interviewing with him. And of course, it's only years later that I'm like, kicking myself saying, oh my God, I'm interviewing with Walter Isaacson. I interviewed with Walter Isaacson. I really had no appreciation for it. I didn't take the job, went a different direction, but it was a funny byproduct of my early web magazine days. So
that was the beginning. And then I see most recently you've been playing with the air and a sign of Enigma machines with mechanical rotor crypto devices. How did you land that gig?
Well, I shoot a lot for IEEE Spectrum, which is the magazine for IEEE Association, and it's a wonderful magazine. So anybody that's an IEEE member, you should get a hold of the magazine. It's also online, but the print magazine is wonderful, and please subscribe and support print journalism and print magazines. And they have a wonderful team there, and they assigned me to photograph, interesting profiles of people and artifacts and tech history and different stories. This was a story that I did for them earlier this year. I think it came out a few months ago, on a electrical engineer by the name of John Paul, who is just one of the most interesting people I've ever met. In terms of his background, he was a photographer. He developed high-end electrical equipment for musicians for years. But his real passion is restoring old crypto machines. And he was able to get a hold of this one crypto machine from Crypto AG, which is literally infamous. And there was a whole Washington Post expose on this about how there was this company, I forget exactly if it's German or Swedish, Crypto AG was developing, this is back in the Cold War days, they were developing these cryptography machines and selling them to governments, but they had a secret deal with the CIA to have a backdoor into the machine. And so, and then ultimately it kind of graduated to, not a secret backdoor, but, the NSA or the CIA actually providing the encryption so that they could read all the messages of the machines. And these machines were used widely all over the world by governments. So it was one of the biggest scandals, espionage scandals, that was recently uncovered. There's a huge article about it. Anyway, John Paul gets a hold of this, is able, and nobody has been able to, get a hold of these machines. And these machines haven't worked for years. He restores it by, and I went and photographed him in his lab, 3D printing parts that had worn away, researching the glues, painstakingly restoring this thing. And IEEE we did some video of it as well. There's video in the article of the machine actually working. It looks like your typewriter, Simon. It's huge, but it weighs about 70 pounds. It's made of cast, it's the case around this machine is steel. It's 9 rotors, and it was essentially unbreakable encryption at the time, and would be really hard to break even today in terms of how many potential combinations you'd have to break. So it's this fascinating machine. And we took it apart and photographed all the different parts of it. And John Paul tells the story of restoring it, and the story of how this machine was, one of the biggest espionage coups we've ever had, and scandals when it was uncovered that it was backdoored. So it was a really fun assignment, and a good piece of tech history for people that are into cryptography. Definitely go check this out.
Absolutely. Well, I've got all the books about the Enigma machine, so I'm definitely going to have to go and read that article. It was the .com bubble that got you into open source. I see that you're now a part of the crypto bubble. You're selling NFTs of photographs. Do your subjects get a cut? So what's going on there? What are you doing with NFTs? Is this kosher?
No, it's a great question. You're both happy. Both of you should be happy to know you're both immortalized on the blockchain. Your faces of open source images has been turned into NFTs. The last year I've had some time on my hands, as most people have. It's hard to be a portrait photographer in the middle of a pandemic, but I got really interested in NFTs. For a couple of reasons. One, I just think it's sort of a fascinating disruption in the art market. And people ask me this all the time. They say, "Oh, what is this NFT baloney? I could just download the image from the website. Why would I buy an NFT?
5 cents.
This seems like a 0.05 Ethereum.
Okay, that sounds better. Yeah. This is exactly. Sorry. This was I apologize for my outburst. My outburst was someone put on screen here the NFT of my portrait, and it looked like it was 5 cents, but it's 0.05 of an ether.
Of an ether. Simon was shocked that it was so low. But no, I would.
He's got a trend.
Your NFT is much more valuable than 5 cents. But I got interested in this because the way that photographers monetize images is they typically they'll license them and as I do, to magazines or newspapers that want to use a photo, or somebody wants to put it on a book cover, of a portrait that I've done. They want to use it for their author shot or something like that. That's one way to monetize. The other way is to sell prints. And I've printed actually most of the faces of open source. I have these big, beautiful prints that people can buy and hang on the wall or can be exhibited in different places. But those are really the big ways to monetize images, selling a physical print or licensing a digital artifact. And the NFT thing was really interesting to me because selling prints is good, but as more people move to sort of digital first in their homes, they've got big screens, on their wall. They project things. There are even now digital picture frames that you can install. There has to be an art market for digital display. And I think NFT represents, an opportunity, for that to really come about. And people say to me, well, I don't get it. Why would I buy this when I can just download the JPEG? And I tell people, it's very similar to, as a photographer, selling a limited edition set of prints, which is what I do. So, for a particular image, I'll make 100 prints. They're limited edition. People want to buy those and collect them because there's only a certain number of them, right? There's some value attached to the scarcity of it. And that's the same. The NFT is really the digital equivalent of the limited edition print. That's really what it is. So I put 10, I minted is what they call, instead of printing, 10 NFTs of a lot of the faces of open source, not everybody, but a lot of them. It takes a lot of time to do this, by the way. It's just like a manual, thank God for the pandemic. Otherwise this never would have happened. But I minted these, I put them up, and it was really just an experiment to see what would happen. I priced them very, very low. I mean, I think when I put them up, they were around $90 or something like that. And I just wanted to see if we could use this as a way to fund the project. So instead of people committing to buying a multi-$100 fine art print from me and then having to pay for that to be shipped, God knows where, and then for them to pay to frame that and then to get that up on their wall, that's a really expensive proposition. If someone wanted to support the project, is there another way they could do it instead of just, clicking a PayPal donate button? Could they get something? Could they be part of the project essentially? Could they have a piece of it? And I felt like NFTs might be a way to do that. So I've experimented with it. I've sold some, not many. It's I think very early. I think the whole thing is a little bit ahead of its time. But it's an experiment I put out there. We'll see. We'll kind of see what happens.
Well, we are actually at the end of the show, and there's always 4 questions we ask, and actually 3. One of them is, do you have anything to say about blockchain? And I think you just said it. So that may actually be covered already.
Blockchain, I like it.
Blocky than NFTs. But if you have anything you want to add to that, I don't know. I mean, that may be ahead of its time too. Those times certainly seems to be here.
No, I think that's it. If people want to support the project, they can buy an NFT, and kind of have a little piece of it. I think it's a cool thing for artists. I'm not going to make any predictions about blockchain for other areas, but for my area, for my little corner of the world in photography land, it's an interesting way to monetize photography, and we'll see how it plays out.
I know some people in the music industry, and they think it's a second win for them too. There's and I noticed that Ant is in the NFT business too. So,
good.
And I do photography, so it occurs to me, oh my
Doc,
God,
you should be in the NFT. Anybody should be in the NFT business. It should be you with your archive.
I have so much. I mean, it's such a gigantic archive of, most of it is not art, but it is there. So, a funny thing I've done is with my phone, I shot my feet a couple of times by mistake, and then I started putting a lot of that together. So I was thinking of making a giant mosaic of nothing but my feet, which have been many places. Yeah,
yes,
just like a 4 foot by 4 foot mosaic of Doc's feet going nowhere, but standing in odd places.
I wouldn't have chosen your feet. I wouldn't have assumed you would have picked your feet, but maybe your snowflake.
Well, it's just the first mistake kind of chose that. But I mean, a lot of others I could do. I was so many endless aerial photographs of all kinds of stuff. So, so the last two are: what are your favorite text editor and scripting language? If you hack.
Ooh, my favorite text editor, probably Emacs. Scripting language is definitely PHP, which again may date me a little bit, but it's kind of where I started and where I tend to lean when I need it.
Yeah, I also remember in Linux journal days long ago, somebody said, "You got to dig this new thing called PHP." So all of these things were that, So, well, this has been great, Peter. This has been an awesome having you on here, and we'll have to have you back.
It's great talking to you guys. Great to reconnect.
Okay, great talking to you too. So Simon. So Simon will come up on screen, I imagine. There he is.
There I am.
It's a good show.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. There's lots of little snapshots of history. There's an Art Garfunkel song called "The Thread," which talks about little episodes from throughout a history, and that show was like Art Garfunkel's thread, stretching through time from time immemorial to time imponderable. And wow. I found it particularly interesting that Peter's getting into NFTs and monetizing the blockchain, just like in 1994 he was getting into the web and preempting the success of HTTP. Honestly, if I had had a hypercard deck, then I would have put it on a Gopher server for everybody. I wouldn't have put it on the web. So it was all this. I found this all fascinating, and of course, Peter is urbane and charming as well, so that really helps.
Well, it's funny. I had there's several things that come up. Like you mentioned Dave Carlick, and I remember I didn't know him at all or very well, but I remember when Dave Weiner said, "Oh, he's now on the board of his thing," and there's so many connections there. And I'm reminded, having Peter on the show, how much I thought we didn't get to hang out more. Should hang out.
Yeah.
Great dude.
The other thing that sprang to mind is, I wonder whether Leo has considered selling NFTs of FLOSS Weekly to fund the recordings. Maybe he should get into that.
Of course. Yeah, he should. He should bring it up with the boss. So have you got anything to plug, dude?
Absolutely nothing, follow me on Twitter.
Plug the NFTs of your photo on.
The NFT of my photograph is still available if anyone would like to go purchase it.
I guess there's one for me too. I don't know if there is.
I think there's one of you there as well. And if you did want to support my work, you're very welcome to go onto Patreon and look for WebMink, where you're very welcome to become the 14th sponsor of my open source work up there. Because that's really about it for open source. I'm spending most of my life doing other ventures these days, and the open source stuff is kind of a residual memory in many ways. So no, nothing to plug. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I only just got on a train and went to London for the first time in goodness knows how long yesterday. So.
Well, this has been a great one. I'm scrambling here. One of the reasons I haven't looked to see whether I have an NFT of my photo is that multitasking. I suck at multitasking. I really do. But so I just looked ahead at the schedule. So next week, I am prepared this time. We have Paul Mutton of Netcraft, and Netcraft was an awesome source of data. Just that going back all the way to the beginning of the web, every month they publish all kinds of interesting data on the usage of the web, and especially on the server side, and just lots of stuff going on. There's the NFT for those watching. There's my NFT, and I don't know what my trend is there.
The big problem with NFTs, Doc, and I feel this as well, is that I can buy my portrait, but it won't stop people seeing it.
Yeah. Oh, well. It's all the sorcerer's apprentice at work. And there is no sorcerer. It's just all apprentices everywhere, proliferating everything all over the place. But the web is a whiteboard. I mean, that's another thing too, I mean, I was noticing earlier that Lou Montulli, something he wrote about his regrets of what happened to the cookie disappeared a long time ago. And we're talking on the back channel of whether or not it's on the archive. I think I looked for it once, couldn't find it. But anyway, so next week, Netcraft. And it's been another good one, and we'll see you next week.
So you got yourself the brand new latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung smartphone because you heard about all of the beautiful photography those things can create. But for some reason, you're just not quite getting it done when you try to make your photos. Or you got yourself a brand new camera because you were interested in getting started in photography, but your little new inexpensive camera still isn't quite cutting it. Well, you need to check out my show, Hands on Photography, here on Twit. I'm going to show you how to be a better photographer and a better post-processor, and quite frankly, just help you get the most out of that new camera that's either on your phone or the brand new one that you just got for your birthday or gifts or what have you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So head on over to twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP and subscribe today.